The forest swallowed Ethan's screams as his father's truck roared away, its taillights fading into the dusk. At 18, he stood alone, shivering in the Oregon woods, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his heart pounding with betrayal. Faggot. His father's last word echoed, sharper than the autumn chill cutting through his thin jacket. Ethan stumbled forward, the pine needles crunching under his sneakers. He wasn't just lost in the woods, she was lost in a world that had just disowned him. His family, the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally, had driven him to this remote stretch of forest and left him with nothing but a bag of clothes and a shattered sense of belonging. His crime: loving someone his father couldn't accept, a boy named Caleb, whose shy smile had made Ethan's heart race for the first time. The night deepened, and the forest grew menacing. Ethan's breath fogged in the air as he sank against a tree, his fingers trembling as he clutched his jacket tighter. He wasn't prepared for this, not for the cold, not for the hunger, and certainly not for the gut-wrenching realization that his family had chosen their pride over him. His mother, Linda, had stood silent as his father, Tom, dragged him to the truck. His younger sister, Sophie, had sobbed but said nothing, her eyes pleading as the door slammed shut. Ethan had always been the golden child, straight-A student, varsity soccer player, the son who made them proud. Now, he was nothing. He forced himself to move, his sneakers sinking into the damp earth. The forest was vast, a labyrinth of pines and shadows, and he had no map, no phone, no plan. His father had made sure of that, tossing Ethan's phone into the river before driving off. "You're not our son anymore," Tom had said, his voice cold as steel. Ethan's chest ached at the memory, but he pushed it down. He had to survive. He had to prove them wrong. By dawn, Ethan's legs burned, and his stomach growled. He found a small stream and drank greedily, the icy water numbing his lips. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay still. The forest was both his prison and his refuge, hiding him from a world that didn't want him but offering no comfort. He thought of Caleb, who had moved away months ago, their budding romance cut short by distance, and now this. Ethan's fingers brushed the friendship bracelet Caleb had given him, still tied around his wrist. It was his only anchor to a time when he felt loved. Hours blurred into days. Ethan scavenged what he could: berries, edible roots he vaguely remembered from a school camping trip. He built a makeshift shelter from branches and leaves, his hands blistered and raw. At night, he curled up under a tattered blanket from his backpack, whispering to himself to stay strong. But the loneliness was worse than the hunger. It gnawed at him, whispering that he was unlovable, that his family was right to cast him out. On the 5th day, a hiker stumbled across him. She was a wiry woman in her 50s, her face lined with years of outdoor life. "You okay, kid?" she asked, her voice gruff but kind. Ethan, too exhausted to lie, shook his head. Her name was Mara, a park ranger who patrolled these woods. She didn't ask too many questions, but her sharp eyes seemed to understand more than Ethan said. She gave him water, a granola bar, and a ride to a nearby shelter in her battered Jeep. The shelter was a cramped building in a small town, filled with people who had their own stories of loss. Ethan felt like a ghost among them, invisible yet heavy with his own pain. He didn't tell anyone why he was there, but the weight of his father's words clung to him. Mara visited when she could, bringing him coffee and stories of her own estranged daughter. "Family's complicated," she said one evening, her voice soft. "But you're stronger than you know." Ethan didn't feel strong. He felt broken, discarded, like a piece of trash left to rot. But Mara's visits gave him something to hold onto, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild. He got a job washing dishes at a diner, the kind of place where truckers and locals swapped stories over greasy burgers. The pay was barely enough to cover a shared room at the shelter, but it was a start. Every night, he lay awake, wondering if his family ever thought of him, if Sophie still cried, if his mother regretted her silence. Months passed, and Ethan's life took on a fragile rhythm. He saved every penny, dreaming of a place of his own. He wrote letters to Caleb, though he never sent them, pouring out his fears and hopes onto pages he kept hidden. The forest had nearly broken him, but it had also taught him something. He could survive. He could endure. And maybe, one day, he could forgive. Ethan's hands trembled as he scrubbed plates in the diner's steamy kitchen, the clatter of dishes drowning out the ache in his chest. It had been 6 months since the forest, and though he'd found a foothold in this small Oregon town, the scars of his family's rejection ran deep. Every night, he dreamed of the woods, of his father's voice, and woke with a tightness in his throat that no amount of coffee could wash away. The diner was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of work. His boss, a gruff man named Hank, didn't ask questions but noticed Ethan's work ethic. "Kid, you're wasting your smarts here," Hank said one slow afternoon, tossing him a rag. Ethan forced a smile, but the words stung. He'd wanted to go to college, to study literature, to write stories that made people feel less alone. Now, he was just trying to survive. Mara became his unlikely anchor. She'd stop by the diner on her days off, her ranger uniform swapped for a flannel shirt, and share stories of the woods. One evening, she slid a worn paperback across the counter, a dog-eared copy of Call Me by Your Name. "Thought you might like this," she said, her eyes kind but knowing. Ethan's cheeks burned as he tucked it into his bag. But that night, he read it cover to cover, tears staining the pages. The story of love, longing, and loss felt like a mirror to his own heart. He started writing again, scribbling in a cheap notebook during breaks. Stories of boys who loved fiercely, of families who failed them, of forests that both hid and healed. Writing was his rebellion, a way to reclaim the voice his father had tried to silence. He sent one story to a local literary magazine, half expecting rejection. When they published it, along with a small check, Ethan cried for the first time since the woods, not from pain, but from a flicker of pride. Meanwhile, back in his hometown, Sophie was unraveling. At 16, she was caught between her father's rigid rules and her own guilt. She missed Ethan, her big brother who'd taught her to ride a bike and sneak extra cookies. She'd found his old sketchbook under his bed, filled with drawings of Caleb, their hands intertwined. Sophie had known Ethan was gay before he told their parents, and she'd kept his secret, hoping it would protect him. It hadn't. One night, Sophie confronted her mother, Linda, in their quiet kitchen. "Do you even know if he's alive?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Linda's face crumpled, her hands twisting a dish towel. "Your father thought it was best," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. Tom's anger had ruled their home since Ethan's coming out, his sermons about sin poisoning every conversation. Linda had stayed silent, torn between her love for her son and her fear of her husband's wrath. Now, that silence haunted her. Sophie started searching for Ethan in secret. She scoured social media, called shelters, even wrote to Caleb, whose family had moved to California. Caleb's response was brief but kind. He hadn't heard from Ethan since the summer. Sophie's heart sank, but she didn't give up. She saved her allowance, planning to run away if she had to, determined to find her brother and tell him she was sorry. Ethan, unaware of Sophie's efforts, was building a fragile new life. He moved out of the shelter into a tiny studio apartment, its walls thin and its heat spotty. But it was his. He hung a single photo on the wall, a Polaroid of him and Caleb at a school dance. Their smiles tentative but real. The bracelet Caleb had given him still hung on his wrist. Frayed but unbroken. Ethan didn't know if he'd ever see Caleb again. But the memory of him was a lifeline. One evening, Mara invited Ethan to a local LGBTQ support group. He hesitated, the word gay still feeling like a wound. But Mara's gentle insistence won him over. The group met in a community center, a mix of young and old, each with their own stories of rejection and resilience. Ethan listened, his throat tight, as a trans woman shared her journey of being kicked out at 15. For the first time, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My family left me in the woods," he said, and the room fell silent. When he finished, a man his age, Jamie, squeezed his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," Jamie said, and Ethan felt a weight lift. Just a little. But the past wasn't done with him. Late one night, as Ethan walked home from the diner, his phone buzzed, a cheap burner he'd bought with his first paycheck. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Ethan." Sophie's voice cracked. "It's me. I'm so sorry." Ethan froze on the sidewalk, the phone pressed to his ear. Sophie's voice slicing through the fog of his memories. "I've been looking for you," she said, her words tumbling out between sobs. "I didn't know they'd leave you like that. Ethan, I swear." His heart pounded, torn between longing and rage. For a year, he'd imagined this moment, his family reaching out, begging for forgiveness, but now it felt like a trap. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice sharp. Sophie explained she'd tracked him through the literary magazine, his story's byline giving away his new town. Ethan's chest tightened. His words, meant to heal him, had led his past straight to his doorstep. He didn't know what to say. Sophie was his little sister, the one who'd always looked up to him. But she'd been there that night, silent as their father drove him into the woods. "I can't do this right now," he said, hanging up before she could protest. The phone shook in his hand as he shoved it into his pocket. He walked faster, the cold night air biting his face, trying to outrun the flood of emotions her call had unleashed. Back in his apartment, Ethan sat on his creaky bed, staring at the Polaroid of him and Caleb. He wanted to call Caleb, to hear his voice, but fear stopped him. What if Caleb had moved on? What if he blamed Ethan for disappearing? Instead, he opened his notebook and wrote, the words spilling out like blood, "I survived you, Dad, but I don't know if I can forgive you." Across the state, Sophie sat in her room, her phone clutched tightly. She'd snuck out to a payphone to avoid her father's prying eyes. Tom had grown colder since Ethan's banishment, his anger a constant shadow over their home. Linda was a ghost of herself, her eyes red from crying, her voice soft and defeated. Sophie felt trapped, her love for her brother a secret rebellion against her father's rules. She wrote Ethan a letter that night, pouring out her guilt, her love, her desperate need to make things right. She didn't know his address, so she sent it to the magazine, hoping it would reach him. Ethan's days at the diner blurred together, but Sophie's call lingered like a bruise. He confided in Mara, who listened over coffee at the counter. "She's just a kid," Mara said. "She's trying to fix what she didn't break." Ethan nodded, but the hurt was too raw. He threw himself into his writing, his stories growing bolder, more honest. Another piece got published, this time in a bigger magazine, and with it came a small but growing readership. People wrote to him, strangers who'd been cast out like him, their letters a lifeline he hadn't expected. At the support group, Ethan grew closer to Jamie, whose quick wit and warm smile reminded him of Caleb. They started hanging out after meetings, sharing cheap beers and stories of survival. Jamie had been disowned too. His conservative family cutting him off when he came out as bi. "You ever think about going back?" Jamie asked one night, sprawled on Ethan's couch. Ethan shook his head. "They don't get to have me back," he said, but the words felt less certain than they used to. A month later, Sophie's letter arrived. Ethan found it in the magazine's forwarded mail. His name scrawled in her familiar handwriting. He didn't open it right away, letting it sit on his table like a ticking bomb. When he finally read it, her words broke him open. "I should have fought for you. I was scared, but that's no excuse. I love you, Ethan, and I'll do anything to make this right." She'd included her new burner phone number, begging him to call. He didn't. Not yet. But he kept the letter, tucking it into his notebook. The support group became his refuge, a place where he could be himself without fear. He started volunteering there, helping organize events, finding purpose in the community he'd stumbled into. Mara noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders straightened, his smile less guarded. "You're building something good here," she said. "Don't let the past take that away." But the past was stubborn. Linda, Ethan's mother, was cracking under the weight of her silence. She'd started attending a different church, one that preached love over judgment, and the sermons stirred something in her. She began questioning Tom's actions, their marriage straining under the tension. One night, she found Sophie crying over Ethan's sketchbook and broke down too. "We were wrong," Linda whispered. "I was wrong." Sophie hugged her, and together they made a plan. They'd find Ethan, no matter what Tom said. Ethan, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own heart. He'd started texting Jamie, their conversations flirty but cautious. Jamie was safe, present, real, but Caleb's memory still haunted him. Ethan found Caleb's new number through a mutual friend and stared at it for days, his thumb hovering over the call button. Could he risk opening that wound again? Could he handle another rejection? Ethan's finger hovered over Caleb's number, his heart a tangle of hope and fear. It had been nearly 2 years since they'd last spoken, since Caleb's family moved to California, leaving Ethan with only memories and a frayed bracelet. He typed a message, "Hey, it's Ethan. Can we talk?" and hit send before he could overthink it, his pulse racing as he waited for a reply. The reply came an hour later. "Ethan. Holy shit. I've been worried about you." Caleb's words were a lifeline, pulling Ethan back to a time when love felt possible. They texted late into the night, Caleb's messages filled with warmth and questions about where Ethan had been. Ethan didn't tell him everything not yet, but the ache of missing him eased just a little. Caleb was in college now, studying art, and he'd never stopped thinking about Ethan. "I'm coming to Oregon next month," Caleb wrote. "Can I see you?" Ethan's world tilted. The idea of seeing Caleb again was thrilling and terrifying. He wanted to say yes, but the wounds of his family's rejection made him wary. What if Caleb saw the broken parts of him and turned away? He confided in Jamie at the support group, who grinned and nudged his shoulder. "You're allowed to be happy. You know," Jamie said. "Go for it." Ethan smiled, but doubt lingered. Happiness felt like a risk he wasn't sure he could afford. Meanwhile, Linda and Sophie were quietly defying Tom. Linda had found the magazine with Ethan's story and read it, her heart breaking at the pain woven into his words. She contacted the editor, who reluctantly gave her Ethan's P.O. box address after she explained her regret. Sophie wanted to go to him immediately, but Linda urged caution. "He might not be ready," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. They decided to write another letter, this time together, pouring out their apologies and love. They mailed it, hoping it would reach him before Tom found out. Ethan's life was gaining momentum. His writing was getting noticed, and a small press offered to publish a collection of his stories. He threw himself into the project, spending nights revising, his apartment littered with coffee cups and crumpled drafts. Mara helped him navigate the contract, her pride in him unspoken but clear in her eyes. The support group threw a small party when he signed the deal, Jamie toasting him with a cheap soda. To Ethan, Jamie said, who turned pain into art. Ethan blushed, but for the first time, he felt like he was more than his past. The letter from Linda and Sophie arrived on a rainy afternoon. Ethan recognized Sophie's handwriting on the envelope, but the second signature his mother made his stomach drop. He opened it, his hands shaking, and read their words, "We failed you. Ethan, we let fear win, and we'll never forgive ourselves. Please, let us try to make this right." Linda wrote about her regrets, Sophie about her love for him. They didn't ask for forgiveness outright, but the plea was there, raw and desperate. Ethan didn't know how to feel. Part of him wanted to tear the letter up, to keep the wall he'd built around his heart. But another part, the part that still remembered his mother's hugs. Sophie's laughter ached to believe them. He showed the letter to Mara, who read it slowly. "They're trying," she said, "but you get to decide what that means for you." Ethan nodded, folding the letter carefully. He wasn't ready to respond, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Caleb's visit was a week away, and Ethan's nerves were fraying. He cleaned his apartment obsessively, as if a spotless floor could calm his racing thoughts. Jamie helped, teasing him about his crush but staying late to talk through Ethan's fears. "What if he doesn't like who I am now?" Ethan asked, his voice small. Jamie squeezed his hand. "Then he's not worth it. But I bet he will." The day Caleb arrived, Ethan waited at the bus station, his heart in his throat. When Caleb stepped off the bus, his dark hair longer, but his smile the same, Ethan felt time collapse. They hugged, and for a moment, the world was just them, no woods, no rejection, no pain. Caleb's arms were warm, his voice soft as he whispered, "I missed you so much." They spent the day walking through town, catching up, their hands brushing but not quite holding. Caleb listened as Ethan told him about the forest, his voice breaking only once. "I'm so sorry," Caleb said, his eyes wet. "I should have been there." That night, they sat on Ethan's couch, the Polaroid of their high school dance propped on the table. Caleb touched the bracelet on Ethan's wrist, his fingers lingering. "You kept it," he said, his voice thick. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. When Caleb leaned in to kiss him, it was soft, tentative, like they were rediscovering each other. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole. But the letter from his family loomed, a shadow over his fragile happiness. Could he let them back in? Did he even want to? Caleb's visit was a burst of light in Ethan's shadowed world, but it didn't erase the letter burning a hole in his desk drawer. For 3 days, they lived in a bubble coffee shop, dates, late-night talks, stolen kisses that felt like promises. When Caleb left for California, he made Ethan swear to visit soon. "You're not getting rid of me again," Caleb said, his smile half teasing, half serious. Ethan clung to that promise. But as the bus pulled away, the weight of his family's words crashed back in. He finally responded to Sophie. A short text, "I got your letter. I need time." She replied instantly, a string of apologies and pleas. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to write more. His heart was a battlefield, torn between the love he'd once felt for his family and the pain they'd caused. He threw himself into his writing, the stories pouring out faster now, each one a piece of his healing. His book deal was moving forward, and the small press scheduled a reading at a local bookstore. Ethan was terrified but exhilarated as words, his truth, would be heard. The reading was packed, mostly with faces from the support group and a few curious locals. Jamie sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone when Ethan took the mic. He read a story about a boy lost in the woods. His voice steady despite the lump in his throat. The crowd was silent, then erupted in applause. A woman approached him afterward, her eyes teary. "Your story saved me tonight," she said. Ethan didn't know how to respond, but her words stayed with him, a reminder that his pain had purpose. Back home, Linda was unraveling. Tom's anger had grown sharper, his sermons about family values a constant rebuke. Linda started therapy in secret, the sessions helping her see how her silence had enabled Tom's cruelty. She wanted to leave him, but fear of change, of losing Sophie, of facing the world alone kept her stuck. Sophie, meanwhile, was bolder. She joined an LGBTQ ally group at school, her defiance a quiet tribute to Ethan. When Tom found her rainbow pin, he grounded her for a month. But Sophie didn't back down. "Ethan's my brother," she told him, her voice shaking but firm. "You were wrong." Ethan's life was blooming despite the past. He and Jamie grew closer, their friendship teetering on the edge of something more. But Caleb's calls kept Ethan grounded, their late-night talks a reminder of what they'd had and could have again. He visited Caleb in California, the trip funded by his book advance. They spent a weekend exploring San Francisco, holding hands openly for the first time. "I want this," Caleb said one night, his voice raw. "Us. For real." Ethan's heart soared, but doubt lingered. Could he build a future with Caleb while his past still haunted him? Another letter arrived from Linda, this one more desperate. "I'm leaving your father," she wrote. "I can't live with what we did to you." She'd found a small apartment and wanted Ethan to know he had a home with her if he wanted it. Sophie added a note, begging him to come to her school's pride event. "I want everyone to know how proud I am of you," she wrote. Ethan read the letter a dozen times, his emotions a tangle of hope and resentment. He showed it to Mara, who'd become like a mother to him. "You don't owe them anything," she said, "but you owe yourself peace." Ethan started therapy too, the sessions painful but necessary. He talked about the woods, his father's voice, his mother's silence. The therapist helped him see that forgiveness wasn't about excusing them, it was about freeing himself. He wasn't ready to see Linda or Sophie, but he wrote back. A single page. "I'm trying to understand. I need space, but I'm not saying no forever." It was the most he could offer. His book was published, a slim volume of stories that found a small but devoted audience. At a signing, a teenage boy approached, clutching the book. "I'm gay, and my parents don't know," he whispered. "Your stories make me feel less scared." Ethan hugged him, his own tears falling. He realized then that his pain wasn't just his, it was a bridge to others, a way to heal. As winter settled over Oregon, Ethan felt a shift. He was no longer the boy left in the woods. He was a writer, a friend, a survivor. Caleb planned to move closer, and Jamie confessed he had feelings for Ethan, complicating everything. Ethan didn't know what he wanted, but for the first time, he believed he deserved to choose. Ethan stood at a crossroads, his heart pulled in too many directions. Caleb's promise to move to Oregon was a beacon, but Jamie's confession quiet, earnest, delivered over coffee in the diner left Ethan reeling. "I know you're figuring things out," Jamie had said, his eyes steady. "I'll wait." Ethan wanted to love them both, but the weight of his past made trust feel like walking on glass. His book tour took him across the Pacific Northwest, small bookstores and community centers where he read to crowds of misfits and survivors. Each event chipped away at his fear, replacing it with purpose. Fans wrote to him, sharing their own stories of rejection and resilience. One letter, from a mother who'd disowned her son and now regretted it. hit too close to home. I'd do anything to take it back. She wrote. Ethan thought of Linda's letters, still unanswered, and wondered if he could ever bridge that gap. Linda was rebuilding her life, too. She'd left Tom, taking Sophie to a modest apartment in a nearby town. The divorce was messy, Tom's anger spilling over in bitter arguments. But Linda felt lighter than she had in years. She attended PFLAG meetings, learning to be the ally she hadn't been for Ethan. Sophie thrived at her new school, her pride pin a permanent fixture on her backpack. She sent Ethan texts, photos of her at Pride events, each one a plea for connection. I'm not giving up on you, she wrote. Ethan's therapy sessions grew more intense. He unpacked the forest, the moment his father's truck disappeared, the silence of his mother and sister. You're allowed to be angry, his therapist said, but holding on to it might hurt you more than them. Ethan started journaling, not just stories but raw, messy thoughts about forgiveness. He wrote to Linda and Sophie in his mind, imagining what he'd say if he could face them without breaking. Caleb's move was delayed by school, but they talked every night, their connection deepening. Caleb sent sketches, vibrant drawings of the two of them, a future Ethan could almost touch. Jamie, meanwhile, was a constant presence, bringing Ethan dinner after late shifts, reading his drafts, making him laugh. Ethan cared for Jamie, but Caleb was his first love, the one who'd seen him before the world broke him. The choice felt impossible, and Ethan hated himself for hurting either of them. One evening, Mara invited Ethan to her cabin for dinner, over stew and cornbread. She shared her own story. She'd lost her daughter to addiction after years of estrangement. I didn't get a second chance, she said, her voice thick. You might. Her words haunted Ethan, pushing him to confront the letter he'd been avoiding. He wrote to Linda and Sophie, not promising reconciliation but agreeing to meet. One conversation. He wrote, "That's all I can give right now." The meeting was set for a coffee shop in a neutral town. Ethan arrived early, his stomach in knots. Caleb's voice in his head from their last call, "You're stronger than you think." When Linda and Sophie walked in, Ethan barely recognized them. Linda's face was softer, her eyes red with unshed tears. Sophie, taller now, rushed to hug him, and Ethan let her, though his arms were stiff. They sat, the silence heavy, until Linda spoke. "I failed you," she said, her voice breaking. "I let him take you away, and I'll never forgive myself." Sophie cried, her words spilling out. "I should have stopped him. I was so scared. But I love you, Ethan." Ethan listened, his heart a storm of grief and hope. He told them about the woods, the shelter, the stories that saved him. He didn't sugarcoat his pain, and they didn't look away. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said finally, "but I'm here." It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. They talked for hours, the coffee growing cold. Linda shared her journey, her shame, her fight to be better. Sophie told him about her ally work, her dream of making the world safer for people like him. Ethan felt a crack in the wall he'd built, but he wasn't ready to let it fall. When they parted, Sophie hugged him again, and Linda whispered, "We'll wait as long as it takes." Ethan drove home, his mind spinning. He called Caleb, needing his voice, and cried as he told him about the meeting. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said, and Ethan believed him. Jamie was waiting at the diner when Ethan got back, his smile soft. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan nodded, but the question of his heart, Jamie or Caleb, remained unanswered. The coffee shop meeting lingered in Ethan's mind like a half-finished story, its ending unclear. He saw Linda and Sophie again a month later, this time at a park, where the open space felt less suffocating. They didn't push him, letting him set the pace. But each conversation chipped away at his anger. Sophie brought him a new sketchbook, her way of saying she remembered who he was. Linda shared stories of Ethan as a child, her voice thick with love and regret. Ethan listened, his heart softening but still guarded. His writing was his anchor, the book tour growing bigger as his stories resonated with more readers. He spoke at a Pride event, his voice steady as he shared his journey from the woods to now. The crowd's applause was a balm, but it was Caleb's text afterward incredible that made Ethan's heart race. Caleb was moving to Oregon in a month, and the thought of having him close was both thrilling and terrifying. Jamie, meanwhile, was a steady presence, his feelings for Ethan clear but unspoken since their talk. Ethan felt torn, loving them both in different ways, afraid to choose and lose. Therapy helped him untangle his emotions. He realized his fear of choosing between Caleb and Jamie wasn't just about them, it was about trusting anyone after what his family did. "You're not that boy in the woods anymore," his therapist said. "You get to decide who you let in." Ethan started writing about love, not just the romantic kind, but the messy, painful love of family, of found community, of himself. His stories grew richer, and so did he. Linda and Sophie kept reaching out, their efforts consistent but not demanding. Sophie invited Ethan to her school's Pride event, where she was giving a speech about allyship. Ethan hesitated but agreed, driven by a need to see her shine. The event was vibrant, rainbow flags everywhere, and Sophie's speech about loving her brother through her mistakes brought tears to his eyes. Afterward, she introduced him to her friends, calling him my hero. Ethan hugged her, the first real hug he'd given her since the woods, and felt a piece of himself heal. Linda was there too, standing quietly at the back. She'd been volunteering at a local LGBTQ center, trying to make amends through action. Ethan saw her differently now, not as the silent mother who'd failed him, but as a woman fighting to change. They talked afterward, and for the first time, Ethan shared a piece of his life, his book, his friends, his hopes. Linda listened, her eyes bright with pride. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I'm so grateful you're letting me try." Caleb's move was a turning point. He arrived in Oregon with a suitcase and a smile that made Ethan's heart skip. They spent days together, rediscovering each other, their love stronger for the time apart. Caleb met Mara, who approved with a gruff nod, and joined Ethan at the support group, where his easy charm won everyone over. But Jamie's absence at those meetings didn't go unnoticed. Ethan knew he had to talk to him, to be honest, even if it hurt. He met Jamie at the diner, the place where they'd built their friendship. "I love you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But Caleb's my home." Jamie's smile was sad but kind. "I knew," he said. "I just hoped." They hugged, and though it hurt, Ethan felt lighter. Jamie stayed in his life, their friendship too strong to break. But Ethan's heart belonged to Caleb. Tom, Ethan's father, was the last piece of the puzzle. Linda told Ethan that Tom had started therapy, grappling with his beliefs. But Ethan wasn't ready to face him. The man who'd left him in the woods was a shadow Ethan couldn't yet confront. Instead, he focused on the present, Caleb, who moved into his apartment, Sophie, who visited on weekends, Linda, who was becoming a mother again. Slowly, Ethan's book hit a bestseller list. A small one, but enough to make him feel seen. He dedicated it to Mara, Jamie, Caleb, and the boy he'd been in the woods. At a signing, a teenager asked how he'd survived. "I found people who loved me," Ethan said, "and I learned to love myself." The words felt true, a hard-won truth that carried him forward. As spring bloomed, Ethan stood in his apartment, Caleb's arms around him. Sophie's laughter filling the room during a visit. Linda was coming over later, bringing dinner. Ethan looked out the window, the Oregon sky bright and open, and felt something new, peace. Ethan's apartment was alive with warmth, a stark contrast to the cold woods of his past. Caleb's sketches hung on the walls. Sophie's pride pins decorated the fridge, and Linda's weekly dinners had become a ritual. Ethan had built a family not the one he was born into, but one he'd chosen, piece by painful piece. Yet the shadow of his father, Tom, lingered. A final chapter Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to write. His book's success brought opportunities, speaking engagements, interviews, a chance to amplify voices like his. At a Portland Pride event, Ethan shared his story to a crowd of thousands, Caleb holding his hand backstage. "You're changing lives," Caleb whispered, and Ethan believed him. His words were no longer just as they were a beacon for others, proof that survival was possible, that love could be reclaimed. Sophie was thriving, her allyship a quiet rebellion that grew louder. She'd won a scholarship for her advocacy work, and Ethan was there, cheering, when she accepted it. Linda, too, was finding her place, her work at the LGBTQ Center giving her purpose. She never pushed Ethan to forgive her fully, but her actions steady, sincere spoke louder than words. They were building something new. Not the family they'd been, but one rooted in honesty. Ethan and Caleb were planning a future. They talked about moving to a bigger city, maybe Seattle, where Ethan could teach writing and Caleb could pursue his art. Their love was a quiet strength, built on shared pain and shared dreams. Jamie had started dating someone new, and though Ethan felt a pang at first, their friendship endured, a testament to the bonds that survive heartbreak. But Tom was the unresolved note in Ethan's story. Linda told him Tom had left the church that fueled his anger, his therapy sessions forcing him to face what he'd done. One day, a letter arrived in Tom's handwriting, the first Ethan had seen in years. "I was wrong," it began. "I let hate blind me, and I lost you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry." Ethan read it alone, his hands shaking, the words stirring a storm of anger and grief. He didn't respond, but he kept the letter, unsure what it meant. Mara, ever his anchor, urged him to take his time. "You don't owe him anything," she said over coffee. "But if you want to face him, you're strong enough." Ethan wasn't sure he was, but the idea of seeing Tom off saying everything he'd held back grew louder. He talked it over with Caleb, who held him close. "Whatever you decide, I'm here," Caleb said. Sophie, too, supported him, though she admitted she was still angry at their father. Ethan agreed to meet Tom at a neutral Placia Park bench by a lake, far from the woods that haunted him. Tom looked older, his face lined with regret, his hands fidgeting. "I don't know how to fix this," Tom said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. Ethan, I was so wrong." Ethan listened, his heart pounding, as Tom recounted his journey, his shame, his fear, his slow unraveling of the beliefs that had driven him to cruelty. Ethan didn't forgive him. Not yet. But he spoke his truth, the pain of the woods, the years of rebuilding, the man he'd become despite it all. "I don't know if I can ever trust you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But I'm glad you're trying." Tom nodded, tears in his eyes, and they parted without promises. It wasn't closure, but it was enough for now. Ethan drove home to Caleb, who wrapped him in a hug that felt like home. Years later, Ethan stood at a podium, accepting an award for his writing. Sophie was in the audience, now in college, her pride pin gleaming. Linda sat beside her, her smile soft but proud. Tom was there too, at the back, invited by Sophie but not by Ethan. Their eyes met briefly, A silent acknowledgement of the distance they'd crossed and the distance still to go. Ethan's speech was simple. This is for everyone who's been left behind. You are enough. The crowd roared. But Ethan's eyes were on Caleb, whose love had carried him through. As he stepped off the stage, Sophie rushed to hug him, Linda close behind. Ethan felt the weight of his past lift. Not gone but lighter. A story he'd rewritten with every step. He wasn't the boy in the woods anymore. He was Ethan Ryder. Lover. Survivor. Whole.